Okay, thanks. Well, I'm going to lead us off, and then Erin's going to get nitty-gritty with some really practical stuff at the end, but I'll sort of do the high-level view. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer. When I got the email today, and it said home-based rehabilitation, and I'm going to be totally blatant here. We're talking about home-based exercise. We're talking about rehabilitation is a large topic, but we thought we'd focus today on specifically home-based exercise programs and some considerations for how to design and implement those. So if you go to the next slide, please. We're going to talk about just sort of what do we mean by it. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages. I'll tell you a little bit about what I found in the scientific literature about the evidence for these. And then, as I said, we'll end with some really practical, what does it look like, specifically focusing on tele-exercise. Okay, next slide. So when we think about home-based exercise, it really can be anywhere on this continuum of you just give someone a prescription and expect them to go off and do it, to the other end of the continuum, which is more like what happens in traditional fitness training or in some form of therapy where we're doing it together, but the patient, the participant is at home and we're someplace else. And so that's a wide swath, and there are different locations along the way that maybe more or less fit what you're trying to do. So we're going to try to think about the mentality behind where on the continuum you feel like your particular program fits and should fit, and maybe how you can broaden to include different parts of this continuum. So next slide, please. So I'll be totally upfront with my bias as I go into this and how I think about home-based exercise. So first of all, I'm not an exercise scientist and I'm not a fitness professional. I'm a rehabilitation scientist, and I've worked with hundreds of people in my research studies delivering interventions, and we're focused on broad things, but often people want to work on exercise. And the research in my studies, the two types of home-based exercise I've helped facilitate for people have been one where I've gone out to their homes, and I was working with older adults who were done with their cancer treatment, and we were working on many things to reduce disability, but exercise was one path towards that a lot of people worked on. So we would sometimes practice these things and they would go off and do it independently in between these home visits. And the second type of study I've been involved in, we were giving more of an exercise prescription. So thoracic surgeon was saying, like, here's what I want you to do to get prepared for your lung cancer surgery. He would give a prescription. We gave a monitored fitness device to try to help track how they were doing. And so that's sort of where I've been in my research on the continuum. And I think what I feel like is I think that it is really important. Ideally, in an ideal world, we would have at least one opportunity to watch and participate in exercise with them. And I think that that's really important, one, for safety, because it's not benign. People can get hurt, they can fall, they can do things, they can injure themselves during exercise. So I do believe that having the chance to lay eyes on people and customize what they're doing can promote safety. And then oftentimes people do need some sort of feedback too. We were talking about different poses and how do you remember, like, what stretch did she want me to do? What was that called? Oh, right. And that's why people like all of us are employed, because you do need some instruction and some feedback to make sure you're doing it in a safe way or doing it in the most therapeutic way that's going to actually give you the best stretch or the best chance to gain your strength. And then the third reason I think it's really ideal and important to, even if you are facilitating home-based exercise, to have one opportunity at minimum to help watch people exercise or lay eyes on them, goes back to last month we talked about behavioral strategies to help people initiate and sustain exercise. And it's really important to have positive, successful experiences with exercise early on, whether that's for a novice exerciser who's just starting, or for someone who had been an athlete before their cancer treatment, but now they're relearning what their body can do and wants to do and what they can tolerate. And so it's really helpful to have a professional be able to help customize that. So we're going to talk about lots of different things on the home exercise continuum, but I do think, I'm just putting it out there, I personally think it's really helpful to have at least one session where you really are interactive and able to see how they exercise. Okay, next slide, please. And so if you think about the mentality of what you're offering in your program, I feel like home-based exercise really has to be a solution, because not everyone can come to us, not everyone wants to come to us. And so the advantages of home-based exercise are that the person doesn't have to leave their home. That for some people helps to save time. I minimize the commute and the time spent getting to a gym or a cancer center. And also it can make it more flexible for me to fit in exercise, because I don't have to go out and break up my day that way. Potentially it can be cheaper, depending on how much exercise equipment you invest in at home. And there are some advantages for people who are not as comfortable exercising in public, or for whatever reasons, body image reasons, they feel more comfortable working out at home. Home-based exercise can be an advantage in that way. But the flip side can be true in terms of, yeah, I don't have to leave home, but I also don't get to leave home. I think we can all sort of think about that in a different way, particularly as we age. There are a lot of real benefits to getting out in your community, cognitively, emotionally, and physically. Leaving home to exercise can play a really important part in helping people maintain their function and their vitality as they age. So home-based exercise may have wonderful, convenient reasons, but it possibly for some people, a disadvantage can be that they're not with other people and they're not having that structure and social. And also if a gym or theoretically a cancer center exercise room are probably going to have there's more to access than what I can put in my basement. And also if I'm exercising at home, homes are different in terms of how much space and geography of your neighborhood. I spend a lot of time talking with people about how practical it is to walk in a hilly environment as they're starting out, how that works for people. So sometimes home is not geographically suited for exercise for some people, depending on where they are. And then home exercise, not many of us live with a fitness trainer, and so it's harder to get the guidance to really help get me to doing the most potent, most therapeutic exercise. So I think that's sort of the pros and cons thought process that goes into how will it work for one program or for any individual survivor. And next slide, please. And so that's the minimum. It's not an all or nothing. It's not it's better or worse. It's not we have to have on-site or we have to have off-site. It really depends on having options so that each survivor will have a different, maybe not profile, but like a different weighting of those pros and cons. The convenience and the flexibility really can be something that really sustains for some people, whereas for other people, actually not getting out and having the structure is a detractor, and it makes it harder to sustain exercise. So it's really helping each survivor figure out what will work for you on this continuum of gym-based or home-based exercise. And knowing that the provider, that those weightings, that profile can change over time as your life changes, as your family changes, as your time since treatment changes. It doesn't always have the same answer for any individual person at the same part of life. And so I would say, I think it's important if you were going to have a comprehensive cancer survivorship program, it's nice to have multiple options, and home-based exercise should be one of them. We talked about before in the earlier section about how if people come to a class and they sustain it, but they're theoretically going to graduate out of the class and become gym members, how do we get that to happen? And I think part of that key is helping people figure out what was it that worked about a gym-based class, and how can you make that, if you are going to be home-based, how do you make that part of your routine? How do you get the feedback or the accountability or the socialization that helped you become an exerciser in the first place. So that's sort of a little bit of an overview. Next slide, please. As I looked at I tried to do a quick search to say what was the most updated evidence, what do we know about home-based exercise and cancer survivorship? And there are a lot of, there's obviously been a lot of research out there that now we have some different reviews and meta-analyses that we can look at. So I just have a couple resources that if you really need to dig into this, I'd start with these because they talk about reviewing physical activity interventions for people done with treatment. The second one is for people receiving treatment with a focus on breast cancer. But then the third one is about different, a meta-analysis for different types of people surviving different types of cancer. And so next slide, if you look at these, if I tried to distill down the takeaway from that in a nutshell, given the time we have, the idea is that there's a lot of research out there that says it's feasible. There are ways that we found to do this and to try to help foster exercise at home. And that exercise at home, if people are adhering to this exercise prescription that's recommended for them, can have improvements in physical functioning. Same way it can sort of happen at the gym. The gaps and the things that I think the science needs to catch up with is a lot of the studies in these reviews looked at immediate outcomes of doing home-based exercise. Very few followed people out once that initial intervention stopped trying to facilitate home-based exercise. And the ones that did follow people out suggest that there's a reason to think it's hard for people to sustain gains after the intensive intervention happens. And so that tells me as a researcher, not necessarily that we have to intervene forever, but that we have to make sure, just like that conversation we were having last month, in terms of we have to figure out what are the things that work for people and how do they make that an explicit plan to help them sustain exercise. The other thing that's apparent in the reviews is there really isn't a lot of information about adverse events and safety of home exercise. We know it's feasible, but I heard Lee Jones give an incredible talk at the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine last year about how one of the things that's missing in exercise science, surprisingly, is we don't have a lot of information about adverse events in cancer rehabilitation. And dose reductions and that idea of how do we help titrate things to keep people safe. And the other thing is they noted in these reviews that a lot of the outcomes that people are measuring in home-based exercise research talks about self-reported. You know, how often did you do it and how did you feel, and reporting your gains. But the more current studies are focusing on shifting to objective measures and making sure that there's some way to track with monitors how much exercise was done, and strength testing and fitness testing as opposed to perception of how that went. Next slide. So anyways, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we just tried to think about, okay, if you were coming into this and if we in a cancer center wanted to try to expand our program what are the questions we have to ask ourselves in terms of how to get this work done? So I just wanted to orient to some of these practical considerations. Next slide. And so the first thing would be this idea of, what do you tell people? Like, how will you help them know what exercise works for them that will meet their recovery goals? And how do you find ways to make it individually tailored and safe for them to do it? And once again, there's a little bit of a continuum in terms of, I know at our cancer center, we did develop, one of the physical therapists developed a video that was more motivational in nature to try to help people get on board with the idea of what they could do and how a walking program could help, and some demonstrations of some general strength exercises that should be relatively safe for most survivors. So you could be on that, a video, a booklet of instructions or pictures or things like that is part of one part of the portfolio that you would consider in home-based exercise. But as a lot of people are doing now, and I'm sure many people on the line have experiences with, then there's the option of having online classes that Erin's going to talk about a lot, or hybrid versions of having people come in, and do something and customize either individually or in a group, and then with the expectation that they maintain that at home. And that would fall under the rubric of home-based exercise also. Next slide, please. And as we think about where people are going to exercise, I think it's important to sort of help people think through that in terms of there are different space requirements for different forms of exercise. And it would be nice perhaps to have a little bit of a menu, a booklet to help people think about, you know, considerations of what you need to do certain things, to do yoga, how much space would you need, how much space would you need for, you know, and how to think about your environment for a walking program, and helping people to assess the pros and cons of different settings. Again, if someone is used to like, oh, I used to walk all the time with my neighbor, and I've put that off while I'm in treatment, but I really want to get back to it, you know, perhaps before they didn't notice how hilly their environment was, but it could really affect how they experience walking and exercise now. And so helping people think about, we do a lot in our research studies, tell me a little bit about your environment, your neighborhood, you're walking. Are there places to slow down? What's the incline like? Are there sidewalks? Do you have enough space? If your balance is a little bit less steady than before, how do we make sure that stays safe? You have time to get off the road if you're in New Hampshire and there are no sidewalks. And so I do think it's really important to do some problem solving with people to think about those idiosyncratic challenges. What's your home like? What's your neighborhood like? And how can we help you figure out ways, excuse me, to exercise safely? And next slide. And then again, there's the idea of how do we help people to exercise safely at home? What equipment is needed? How do we help people have access to that, whether that's lending library? How do we help them make sure they can have options for exercise that doesn't involve equipment, exercise that might involve equipment that they have? How do you think about what you have in your home that can be used safely? And I think it's really important to help people have a plan to try to minimize risk of harm during exercise. And a lot of the times people, you know, we all kind of want to have an understanding of how do I know, when do I be alarmed? And, you know, those messages we learn to send about like, pain is not good. Exertion is not necessarily bad. Pain is a signal to stop. So helping people understand and to helping them realize we want you to not push yourself to that point of exhaustion when you're recovering, that we want to stop before exhaustion, which may not have been what you were doing pre-cancer treatment. And then also thinking about how do they schedule it. You know, as I mentioned, one of the advantages of home-based exercise is it's flexible. I can do it whenever, but that also means I can do it whenever. And, you know, 10 o'clock becomes after lunch, which can become after dinner. I'll get to it. And so sometimes, you know, without that 3 o'clock of the gym class, some people thrive that way, and some people it's a real downfall for them. So it's helping survivors figure out where are they and how can they figure out how to make it work for them. And then, you know, also if what they loved about your class when they come to PALS is how to be social and exercising with people, try and help them figure out how do I get some of that at home? Is it through online? Is it through with a neighbor that helps keep me accountable? How do I do that and make it part of what keeps me doing this? Because I think one of the hardest things with all of us is we think like, okay, if I get fit, that's the end game and I'll stay fit. It's like, no, if we don't work to stay fit, we're all aging and we're not gonna keep the gains that we've got. So that's sort of the overview of like, how do I think about home-based exercise and the questions to try to think about setting up your program. But I think this is the point we jump into Erin. Like Erin has had a lot of practical experience doing tele-exercise, and I think you take over from here. Next slide.
Yep, thank you, Kathleen. Gotcha. Great kickoff, and certainly some of these slides are coming from, you know, my biases and kind of from my side of things, acting as a personal trainer, but I think they're all really good things to think about as we are working to create programs in our communities. So I also, gave thought to the pros and cons when it comes to virtual training, teletraining, whether it's small group or kind of in a one-on-one setting. And, the benefits are things that we know that people can access our programs anywhere and everywhere. And that's a pretty exciting thing. With a little bit of creativity, some basic body weight exercises, bands, that we can create this programming for everyone. So reaching a broader audience is a benefit, as well as, affordability for a lot of people. I think my programs are generally grant based. So, they're coming at no charge, at a cost to those who are participating, which is a wonderful thing. Right now, given the time that we are facing, certainly for all those who are in treatment or recently undergone treatment or in a higher risk bracket, this is the safest option. And it is, for many of them, it's the only option. So again, being able to work online with people allows us to be able to always kind of even travel with them. So a lot of my participants are also taking me on the road, which is really wonderful. And again, we have drawbacks with this model, and we know that some people don't like to work outside of the gym. There's a real validation to going to a facility, and it can be social, but it also can be just something that they've, something that's manifested in terms of their intrinsic feelings. We've got live virtual training, for people, but once you get beyond bands or beyond a certain weight of dumbbells, in order to continue to have growth for some of these individuals, cost, to buy more equipment, but there may not be accessibility wise equipment that they need. Wi-Fi challenges. I watched this happen with my kids who are going to school remotely. I never would have thought that Wi-Fi was such a significant challenge for so many, but certainly it is. And then space, and Kathleen alluded to this and spoke about how, we have to ensure that every client has an area that will really work for home workouts. Some of my folks in PALS just this week are talking about how they're going to change rooms, because what they thought was going to be beneficial has turned out to be too small, or perhaps there's just more things in the way. So lots of things to think about here. Next slide. So as far as technology goes, some of you may already know all of this, and that's wonderful, but speaking to some new trainers and staff people, you got to have technology to support what you're doing. Sounds easy, but it isn't always. So having a device for us that's used as a camera, such as a tablet or a laptop, to help us actually demonstrate exercises, and also observe the clients during our sessions. Because we're not meeting with them in person, for me to be able to give them instruction and then actually see what they're doing as the class progresses has been really helpful. And then I often will use a secondary device to type in, if it's one-on-one, any workout details that are specific to the individual. Just to, of course, have a record log going of what's going on in the session. Having a tripod, a Bluetooth headset, things of that nature, and then having a video conferencing software that works well for you. They each have their kind of nuances and things that make them easy or hard for those who are participating, but making sure you have a standard to work from is helpful. Next slide. So the home base, the setting it up questions, things that we talk about. From a trainer's perspective, when I'm doing it, I always need to make sure that I have enough room to demonstrate for them, right? Does it have enough room for all the equipment that we might be using? Is the environment clean, away from distractions? If I'm working from home, I try to ensure that, of course, I have my children attended to so that there aren't interruptions, so that people aren't coming in and out of view. And also, a place to sit and observe my client, but also document their workout details. So I tend to have a place where I can do both. One where I can emphasize showing them specific exercises, but also then having a place to be able to sit and I do that because often I try to get on before the sessions and stay a little bit after, and that provides that opportunity for a little bit of socialization and kind of catching up with folks. And if you have an open chat, certainly that helps people, connect with one another as well. Ample light is a big deal when setting up the stage for your sessions, and obviously natural light is best. Next slide. So fitness equipment. This is always, I think, sometimes people's biggest barrier, but it doesn't need to be. I typically, will recommend that each client has, 2 or 3 sets of varied dumbbells. And I always try if, of course, I'm showcasing exercises, to have ones that are really bright in color, just so they can see them better and view them from the screen a little bit better. But clearly you need something to be able to properly demonstrate usage. And as we talked about earlier, workouts are really possible with little to no equipment. And, generally weight requirements vary from client to client. So we're fortunate here at the Aquatic Center where we can promote fit kits, and we can have a pro shop where, we can get people to be able to even do curbside pickup right now for things that they need. But we give them all the resources if there are, links to things as well to better support them in the buying process. Next slide. Just touching back on lighting. We want people to have the clarity when we do our sessions. So, being observant of if you have windows, because it will, cause you to look dark and appear shadowy on the camera. And I've even put in a couple of links that really help people. So if you're a trainer listening to this today, when you're working on doing, teletraining from home, I think those links will be really helpful as in terms of guiding you, in terms of providing better lighting for yourself. Next slide. And again, this is more for the trainers on the call, but, some people ask questions, like what do we typically charge for, types of sessions? If we're looking at the group-based model, it could be different if it's grant funded or if we're getting support dollars. But generally, a one-on-one session would be about 25% less than a general live personal training session. And so there's some examples there for you. And we always encourage, of course, for accountability and, basic contracts and cancellation policies with clients as you move forward, to help support you, in, building your business. Next slide. Hold on one second, I'm sorry. All right, so, and then as a resource, we like to give people access to, of course, client files, like what do you do to support those client files? So Google Docs works really well, and it's affordable and easy to use. And it syncs in all places, and it's a great way to connect with your clients and share what they're doing and how much they're learning and their progress through charting, Excel charts, that sort of thing. We keep all emergency contact information in the Google Shared Drive. We also list out, what individuals have at home, so I don't have to continue to ask them those questions that, when I'm working with them, whether one-on-one or in a group setting, I know what each person has, so I know what their limitations are. So like with PALS, I know who has stability balls versus who doesn't. I know who may need to be using, if they don't have a bench, they might be using their sofa instead. And so it really helps me bridge the gap for them when going through their exercises and learning things for the first time. Next slide. So again, it's always important to have, forms such as the PARQ, safety waivers, because that kind of gets into kind of doing home-based exercise, liability releases. We go as far as doing, teaching people how to do potentially measurements from home as of recently, and taking before and after photos. We do all of these things to better support their accomplishments and progress, depending on what their goals are, of course. Next slide. And, as far as, when we talk more specifically about survivorship programs and doing this virtually, we're finding that, music is a great, it bridges the gap a little bit between my constant voice and chatter and their inability to socialize. So having really good music playing in the background gets people in the mood to exercise and engages them in a positive way. We also, are right now we have some basic things, but we're really working to improve, of course, our encyclopedia of exercises. We've had a professional photographer come in the last couple of weeks to support kind of the building of a really big support, document, Google Share for all the people who participated in our program, so they can actually have direct, they can type in an exercise and find it right away, and not only see that photo, but see the how-to and the preparation for it, but also a regression and or a progression to that exercise. So when we think about a session, it's always important to try to engage the audience. And so for us, that could be, asking them a question in the chat box prior to their session, just to get them talking and thinking and feeling like they're more a participant, not just like they're watching a live video and they're going along with it, that I'm excited that they're there. So thinking more about pre-session activities and kind of community builders when you're teaching virtually. Obviously, we try really hard to avoid distractions. Hands-free headsets are great. And then, also thinking about post-training success. So we do a little kind of ceremony for our people every 12 weeks, when they graduate, because 3 months is an accomplishment. It's actually, a short amount of time, but it's a long period of time to be trying to change habits and doing something new. So really kind of coming together and celebrating those victories, I think is a really great way to kind of bring people together, but also to show them their achievement and getting recognition for that, so that they feel, positive about moving forward. And I think I have maybe just a quick reference slide here at the end. Yeah, so just some resources for you if you're looking to find more information about some aspects of teletraining. So we want to invite your questions. So I'm going to let Grace chime in.